Before we begin, this story involves addiction, overdose deaths, and corporate exploitation of vulnerable people. If that's something you need to step away from, we understand. Take care of yourself first. November 24, 2020. A federal courtroom in Virginia. A pharmaceutical company stands before a judge and pleads guilty to 3 felony charges: conspiracy to defraud the United States, violating federal anti-kickback laws, and conspiracy to violate the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. The company's product had contributed to the deaths of more than 500,000 Americans over 2 decades. The fine was $3.5 billion. And the family that owned every share of the company, the family that had directed its strategy and pocketed its profits, not a single one of them was charged with a crime. You're listening to the Unlit Room. Every story in here actually happened. That's the part that should scare you. New stories every day, Monday through Saturday. Today, how one family turned a painkiller into an epidemic and walked away free. The Sackler name used to mean something different. It was on the walls of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, on a wing at the Louvre, on buildings at Oxford, Yale, and Harvard. Arthur, Mortimer, and Raymond Sackler were philanthropists, or that's what the plaque said. In 1952, the 3 brothers purchased a small pharmaceutical company called Purdue Pharma. It sold earwax remover and laxatives. Unremarkable, forgettable. That would change. In 1995, the FDA approved a new Purdue product, OxyContin, extended-release oxycodone, a powerful opioid painkiller designed to release its dose slowly over 12 hours. The idea was simple. A patient in chronic pain could take 1 pill in the morning and 1 at night, instead of a handful throughout the day. Purdue's marketing pitch hinged on one specific claim. Because of the time-release mechanism, OxyContin carried a lower risk of addiction than other opioids. Less than 1% of patients would become addicted. Less than 1%. That number came from somewhere. It was on the FDA-approved label, but it didn't come from a clinical trial. It didn't come from a peer-reviewed study. It came from a 5-sentence letter to the editor published in the New England Journal of Medicine in 1980. Not a study. A letter. 1 paragraph, written about hospitalized patients receiving opioids under strict medical supervision. A completely different context from outpatient prescriptions sent home with chronic pain sufferers. Purdue took that letter and built a $1 billion marketing campaign on top of it. It's worth pausing on what less than 1% sounds like to a doctor. It sounds like aspirin. It sounds like a medication you don't need to worry about. It sounds safe. Micro cliffhanger 1. But getting doctors to believe that number would require something more than a medical journal. Starting in 1996, Purdue launched a marketing campaign unlike anything the pharmaceutical industry had seen. Over the next 5 years, the company spent more than $200 million promoting OxyContin. Sales representatives fanned out across the country, not to hospitals, but to primary care doctors, family physicians, the kind of doctors who'd never specialized in pain management and had no reason to be skeptical of an FDA-approved label. The pitch came with perks. Purdue hosted all-expenses-paid pain management seminars at luxury resorts. Doctors received free flights, hotel rooms, lavish meals. Some were paid to give talks, not about their own research, but reciting Purdue's talking points about OxyContin's safety profile. The company called them speaker programs. The Department of Justice would later call them something else. By 2001, OxyContin had reached $1 billion in annual sales. It was the most prescribed brand name opioid in America. And in Appalachian towns, in rural communities, in places where chronic pain was a fact of life and a doctor's prescription meant the word of God, people were becoming addicted at rates that had nothing to do with 1%. The towns that got hit first were the ones you'd never hear about otherwise, places with 1 pharmacy, 1 clinic, and waiting rooms full of coal miners with bad backs. The pills arrived like a gift. They left like a plague. Micro cliffhanger 2. In 2007, Purdue would finally face a courtroom. But what happened there was almost worse than what led to it. In 2007, Purdue Pharma and 3 of its executives stood before a federal court in Abingdon, Virginia. They pleaded guilty to a single charge, misleading the public about OxyContin's risk of addiction. The company paid a $634 million fine. The executives paid individual fines. No one went to prison. $634 million sounds like a punishment, until you learn that OxyContin had generated over $35 billion in revenue by that point. The fine was less than 2% of total sales. It was a cost of doing business. And then Purdue did something that, on paper, looked responsible. In 2009, the company reformulated OxyContin. The new pills were harder to crush, harder to snort, harder to dissolve and inject. The abuse-deterrent version was supposed to be the fix. It wasn't. Patients who'd become dependent on OxyContin couldn't abuse the pills the way they'd learned to, but they were still addicted. So they turned to something cheaper, more available, and far more dangerous: heroin. National heroin overdose deaths surged in the years following the reformulation. The CDC tracked the shift in real time. Purdue had changed the formula, and what happened next was worse. There's one detail that reframes everything, and it goes back to the very beginning. The FDA examiner who reviewed OxyContin's application, who approved the label claiming the time-release mechanism reduced addiction risk, his name was Curtis Wright. Within 2 years of approving that label, Curtis Wright left the FDA. His next job was at Purdue Pharma. The man who'd given the government's stamp of approval to the claim that launched the epidemic walked out of the regulator's office and into the company's. The FDA wasn't a safeguard. It was a revolving door. Before the lawsuits could reach them, the Sacklers did something remarkable. Court records and congressional testimony would later reveal that the family had withdrawn more than $10 billion from Purdue in the years before the company filed for bankruptcy in 2019. $10 billion moved out while the lawsuits were piling up, while state attorneys general were preparing cases, while the death toll was still climbing. In November 2020, Purdue pleaded guilty to 3 federal felonies. The company, not the family. The Sacklers negotiated a settlement. They'd pay billions in civil penalties. The company would be dissolved and reconstituted as a public benefit entity. And in exchange, the family would receive broad legal protections. By April 2026, the final settlement was approved. $8 billion total. Purdue Pharma dissolved, and Richard Sackler, who had directed the aggressive marketing strategy as company president, who had pushed sales targets while overdose deaths mounted. Richard Sackler was never charged with a crime. Micro cliffhanger 3. The corporation was convicted, the family walked away, and the death toll didn't stop with them. Between 1999 and 2020, more than 500,000 Americans died from opioid overdoses. That number kept growing after Purdue's dissolution. The epidemic the company ignited didn't end when the company did. There's a word for what happened here, but scandal doesn't quite capture it. A scandal implies something hidden that gets exposed. This wasn't hidden. The marketing was public. The FDA approval was public. The resort seminars and the speaker fees and the 1-paragraph letter dressed up as clinical evidence. All of it was documented, discoverable, eventually discovered. The architecture of this crisis was built in plain sight. What this story reveals isn't a secret. It's a structure. A structure where a corporation can plead guilty to 3 felonies for fueling an epidemic that killed 500,000 people. And the individuals who directed it can write a check and walk away. Not because the system failed. Because the system worked exactly the way it was built to work. The Sackler name has been quietly removed from museum wings and university buildings. But the crisis they helped engineer is still here. It's in every emergency room, every rehab facility, every family that lost someone to a pill that was supposed to be safe. If this one kept you up tonight, good. New stories every day, Monday through Saturday. Subscribe so the next one finds you too. Follow the Unlit Room wherever you listen. Tell a friend, but maybe don't tell them it's all real until after they've finished. Full story on the main channel. Follow if you're wide awake. That was the Unlit Room. See you in the dark.